Welcome tonight to the Walker Lecture Series for 124 years. Thanks to the generosity of Timothy and Abigail Walker, the series has brought entertainment and information to Concord audiences, specifically free lectures on history, literature, art, science, and free dramatic, musical, and cultural events. I am John Kelly. I'm the John at the other end of your email. I'm one of the trustees of the series, and I am proud to serve with Paula Demers, Alwyn Fine, Dale Harrington, and Joanne Martin. We are live tonight, and I will name some dates that will make sense if you're in the audience live, but might be dated if you are watching the recorded version later. Next week, 1 week from tonight, April 14th, please join us on Zoom for a travelogue. Travelogue is called The Road to Namibia. It is photographed by Rick Ray. It's a Zoom meeting this time because Rick Ray will be here with us to introduce his film and to take questions. In 2 weeks, it's the end of the season already. We are ending the season with a performance that is both local and international, and that is a faculty concert from the Concord Community Music School with a focus on Nepali music as part of the concert. This one will be on Concord TV, and therefore no Zoom link is required for the Community Music School. There will be a YouTube link later if you don't catch it on TV live. Speaking of Concord TV, they've been wonderful partners in providing the technology to make all of this happen. And behind the Concord TV logo on your screen is Matt Arsenal, techie extraordinaire, who invites you to message him on chat if you have a technical problem. The season ends, the summer comes, keep your eyes and ears open for summer activities, and the fall will be here soon, and Walker Lecture will be part of the fall. Will we be live? Will we be virtual? We don't know. We would have to ask a psychic, and I learned from a Walker Lecture that might not be a very reliable way to learn the future. But keep your eyes and ears open on our webpage for updates. And if you navigate our webpage a little bit, you will see a preview of the fall season as we wish it to be. Think of it as being penciled in, even though we live in a time of uncertainty. Matt mentioned that we were recording tonight, so if you don't want to show the world your face, I invite you to turn off your camera. And in a minute, we will bring out our guest, Michael Tougais. Michael is a New York Times best-selling author and co-author of 29 books. It might have changed since I wrote this. Among his bestsellers are The Finest Hours, Disney Motion Pictures version opened in 45 countries in 2016, Fatal Forecast, Overboard, King Philip's War, and There's a Porcupine in My Outhouse, The Vermont Misadventures of a Mountain Man Wannabe. To tell us about growing up wild in the 60s and 70s, please welcome Michael Tougais.
Thank you, John. Hi, everyone. And thank you to the trustees for doing all the legwork, putting this together. The book this program is based on is called The Waters Between Us. And it's somewhat of a departure for me, where so many of my other books, involve rescues or history. This is a memoir. And as I was writing, and I'll talk about the writing process a little bit, but as I was writing, I kind of looked at two authors because it's an unusual book in that there's a lot of laughs in it, a lot of crazy stories, but it's also brutally honest and at times very serious. So for the laughs part, I kind of used Bill Bryson as my guide because I always loved his A Walk in the Woods, his memoir about that trip on the Appalachian Trail. But for the brutally honest part, I liked Maya Angelou's book, I Know Why the Caged Birds Sing. So I made a point to read both of those twice during the writing. And people ask, well, what is your writing process? And I say, I really have none. most writers are so disciplined. They get up at 6 a.m. and they do their writing in the morning, and then they leave the afternoon for various paperwork. But I go in spurts. I might not write a thing for a month, and then I might get locked in. And The Waters Between Us had been kicking around in the back of my mind. I'd done some various chapters, but it wasn't until my father passed away 4 years ago that I said, okay, it's time to get to work. So I still have that cabin where the porcupine lives in the outhouse in northern Vermont. So I kind of cloistered myself away up there for on and off during the summer months of not last summer, but the summer before, and put it all together. So it is a very different book in terms of both memoirs and the types of books I write. And so I was writing down before I went on, there's 3 themes in it. One is the yearning for the outdoors and adventure, but this impulsiveness on my part that got me in trouble. The father and son dynamics that we'll talk about. And then later highlighting my father, how he handles adversity. It was a great inspiring lesson for me and for really anybody that's faced with adversity. So to give you a feel for it, I'm going to read from the prologue. I think too that the subtitle helps as well to give you a feel for what this is about. The title is The Waters Between Us. The subtitle is A Boy, a Father, Outdoor Misadventures, and the Healing Power of Nature. And it kind of follows that flow as well. But this will give you an even better idea. This is right from the prologue of the book. And as I do the presentation, by the way, I'm going to be showing slides, and then I'll pause to do a reading so you can put that particular slide in context. So here's from the prologue. I once read that adventure is the result of ineptitude. I had lots of adventures. It's the trips that didn't go as planned, the days nature threw a curve. Those are the days I remember best. The days that went well and could be called successful are long since forgotten in the gray haze of marching time. But oh, those lessons I learned the hard way, those seem like yesterday. Through each misadventure, there was a bit of valuable learning that I didn't fully appreciate until adulthood. When I think back on the episodes in this book, I realize the lessons learned helped me in my everyday life. Many of the adventures caused my father to question my sanity and tested his patience. During my boyhood and into my teens, I was a wild kid and a magnet for trouble. Despite our differences, I instinctively knew that my father loved me, but I felt he didn't like me. There's a difference, and being liked was what I craved at the time. And it's interesting, I just heard from a reader today, and he said that one line in the prologue pulled me in. He goes, even though I'm 62 years old, I still think about that part of the relationship with my dad. There were moments when the divide between father and son ebbed, and we'd have a real connection, a real conversation. These usually happened when we were fishing with my brother. But the thaw in our relationship was often shattered when I'd get myself into a new tangle of trouble. He wondered why I had to push the limits, the boundaries, and the rules. I wished I could have found the words to tell him, but I had no idea what drove me. And still don't to this day. One theory I have is, if I was a kid today, I might have been diagnosed with attention deficit disorder. Who knows? I was just that fidgety kid that always had to be on the move and pushing the boundaries. So it may not have been ADD at all. It may have just been a rambunctious boy that kind of took things to the limits. So I'm going to share the screen, and what I'll do is I want to introduce you to the characters in the book, and I'm going to give you just kind of an overview of the story. Obviously, in 45 or 50 minutes, I don't cover it all, but there's a couple incidents that play a major role. So I am going to bring up my screen. Everybody see that okay? The cover of the book there. There was a gracious and a great writer from New Hampshire, Cy Montgomery, that gave that nice endorsement at the top. She said, a song of praise to the outdoors and an unforgettable memoir. And that was really kind of her because I never met her. We sent her the galley sight unseen. And so if anybody ever bumps into Cy Montgomery from New Hampshire, please say that I was very thankful for what she did. So in this picture, I'm the little guy pouting, and you'll see in other pictures that I've usually got some kind of face going on, or I can't just smile for a photo. There's always something in my hand, or I'm making a face. My older sister is on the far left. Her name is Lynn, and then my two cousins in the middle. And I mentioned having things in my hand, and even at the youngest age, I wanted to be a cowboy or an Indian or a mountain man. That book that John mentioned, There's a Porcupine in My Outhouse, that kind of picks up where The Waters Between Us leaves off. That follows 2 years of trying to live at the cabin in Vermont. But it's a little disconcerting when I was going through old photos to put together for this presentation. Every photo I pulled up of me, from age 4 to 5, I've got something in my hand. There's another toy gun here. There's my mom and my sister. In this one, if you look carefully, I've got a toy hatchet. So it was at a young age that I was identifying with either Native Americans, cowboys, mountain men, you name it. And it didn't just give my dad gray hairs, my mother as well. And there's my younger brother, Mark. He plays a role in the book. And then here's the whole family, the youngest brother, Bob, on my mother's lap. So the setting for this story takes place in 2 locations primarily, Western Massachusetts and Vermont. All our family vacations were in Vermont. I fell in love with the state from an early age, went to St. Michael's College there. Later, we'll talk about the cabin, that's Vermont. Now, in this picture, my father is in his usual white outfit because he was a baker, and he and his brothers had a small factory in Springfield, Mass. And at this young age, of course, I'm too young to understand what that entailed working at the bakery. But when I got older, a couple times I'd go in on vacations and work, say age 14. I could not believe how hard the manual labor was. It's 9 hours on your feet, moving from station to station and they would only take these 2 short breaks throughout the whole day. But when you're a kid, unless you've done it, you don't realize how hard your parents worked. And he was a sergeant in the Army, served in World War II, and then occupied Japan. He said he got very lucky when he had to make a decision whether to make the Army a career or not. He said, I decided, to go back to the family business. And he said, a good thing, he said, because my unit was one of the first to be sent to Korea and was just decimated. But he was always very proud of making it to sergeant because he was the son of Greek immigrants. My mom was Italian and Irish heritage. So even at a young age, I was a wrestler, and that followed me through into high school. There I am with my brother. I don't know how my brother put up with me because, again, I was a fidgety kid. Our brand new TV set, this will bring back some memories. That's the only thing our family ever won, was this brand new TV. So fishing was a big part of my life, and I fell in love with Vermont at this age. I'm on the right. My brother's in the darker clothes on the left. I'm going to just admit somebody here is coming in late. Whoops. And So by going up to Lake Maury in Fairleigh, Vermont, I'm sure some of you are familiar with it at that young age. It just formed such an impression on me that Vermont was the state where all good things happened, because those were these wonderful vacations. And that was really the 1 week out of the 52 that I had a chance to do something active with my father, because the hours he worked were getting brutal. I didn't realize that at the time, so I kind of held it against him. Why doesn't he ever come to, say, one of my baseball games, one of my soccer games, later one of my wrestling matches? But in some respects, and I write about it in the book, parenting was very different back then, and it wasn't necessarily a bad thing that he wasn't that involved in our lives, because I think there were some positives from it. I kind of came away from incidents that, okay, I got to figure this out on my own, and somehow I will. So I think maybe today we've gone too far the other way, where the parents are involved in every facet of the kid's life, where the kid doesn't even have a chance to play a pickup football game in the neighborhood. So maybe a mix between the two. But fishing has never left me. That's one thing from boyhood that stayed with me. Here I'm ruining my sister's picture, my head down below the post, the mailbox. And a big largemouth bass, at least for me at the time. You could see this wild look in my eyes. So you could see that this was the making of a young fisherman, and my dad holding it. But this happened again at that 1 week we would be together at Lake Maury in Vermont. And, I spent all my time outdoors. Now, I do understand kids today have so many more options. But in a way, it's kind of a shame, because we, again, with the kids in the neighborhood, we kind of formulated our own clubs and groups, and we even had a fort, and we would elect a president, and on and on. So I think looking back on it, they were good adventures, and I spent half my time in the trees. I did go away to summer camp, and I'm going to read you a little bit from that. It's kind of a part in the book where I give an opinion, and you don't necessarily have to agree with it. But the first part of this is my mom saved my letters home, and some of those letters were just great to read after all these years. So I was about 12 at summer camp. These are my camp mates. In one letter I wrote, "Finally, we came to a river, so we started crossing it. What a mistake. It was up to our waist, sometimes higher. The current pushed us. We were weighted down by our pack." None of my spelling was accurate in this. And then after I go through this adventure, I write in big capital letters, "I am not exaggerating. P.S. I hope you have been watering my garden." And then here's another letter that she saved for me. And this is all it said in the letter. "Dear Mom, say hello to Dad. Mike." "Dear Mom and Dad, we threw eggs at another cabin. We got killed. Dear Mom, will you be coming to visit? If you do, bring underwear and candy. Dear Bob, we're going fishing tonight. We took a pound of bread from the mess hall. Water my garden." That was kind of unusual to be a young kid having a vegetable garden, but that stayed with me too. So anyway, so now you jump ahead. I'm an adult. I've got my own 12-year-old son a few years back, and I go, "Man, you got to go to overnight camp. There's so many adventures." And then, I'll save your letters about what you're doing. And let's see, I say, later in life, when I had a son of my own, I sent him to camp knowing he would love it and have adventures like I did. I saved his letters. Here's the first one. "Camp is bad. The food is bad. They make us play games that stink. Counselors are really mean. Can't wait till it's over." So some things you might project on your own kids, and they don't go as planned. But for me, camp was a happy memory. other memories of, I think, that add to your spirit of independence was having jobs at an early age. Today, kids don't get a job until they're like 16, but I had a paper route at age 11, and then I had my own little lawn care business in the neighborhood at age 13. And I just learned so much from those things about, dealing with customers. And we were talking earlier, John and I was saying, in some respects, it really was a simpler time with the Beatles breaking through on the scene. In our house, the Beatles were everything. My sister, you could not see any wallpaper in her room because there was just posters plastered everywhere. And you would think her playing those records at full volume would drive my parents nuts, but they loved it. They loved the Beatles music too. So the whole family was into the Beatles. And we saw the man landing on the moon, Neil Armstrong, while we were in Vermont at Lake Maury. So that always stuck with me. A bunch of various guests from the cottages all got together and saw it live. But as I was saying, it wasn't quite as simple as we make the 60s out to be. And in particular, 1968 was a terrible year. And I do remember that well. I was in 7th grade, and it just seemed like the whole world was falling apart. This was earlier. You did have the Cuban Missile Crisis. I only remember hearing my parents talking in hushed tones about it. But then, who knew that later I'd write above and beyond about the pilots, and then based off the Kennedy's secret audio recordings of his meetings. But by the time you got to 68, Vietnam was in full swing, and I was old enough to understand what was going on. And, they used to show, some of you, I'm sure, remember this, on the nightly news at the end of the week, they'd show body counts, how many Americans died and how many of the enemy. And it was always like a 10-to-1 ratio. So you'd think we were winning the war, and how can this enemy outlast us in this war of attrition? But now I suspect those body counts were probably inflated with the enemy as well. But definitely a very divisive time in the country. And then in 68, you had the assassination of Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy, and you had some of the racial issues and inequalities that we have today. So as I was reading about 1968 and refreshing my memory, it's like, in some respects, not much has changed. I did try to get to Woodstock, but my father got wind of my plans. I was way too young to hitchhike out there. And later I tried to get to Watkins Glen, and again, he nixed it. But there were so many trips he didn't know about. I hitchhiked all the way to Maryland and Virginia, and my parents never even knew. Because again, they put the onus on you as the kids to make the right decision and to keep your grades up. And in some of those cases, I wish they had caught me, because some of those hitchhiking trips I did when I was just 14 or 15 did not turn out well. A big plus, from age like 10 to 12, I was reading every kind of outdoor book there was. And Farley Moat, I loved his books. I would go to the library, fill up the basket on my bicycle. I didn't want people to see me, friends to see me in the summer with a basket full of books. So I kind of hide them in my newspaper carrier bag. But even though by this time I was getting in trouble a little bit with the law and my grades were at the rock bottom, they used to put you in classes, by the way, ranked 1 being the smartest kids and 10 being the not so smart. And I was up there with those 10. So it wasn't until high school that I got the maturity to start to turn it around. But I think a big thing that helped was the pleasure reading I did every summer. And then, it's kind of odd that I never set out to write books for young adults, but now I've got my own series, and it's just like the books that I read when I was that age, they're all adventure. My mantra when I write them is make it fast paced. And if they're true stories, even better. The first four in the series were all true. Another plus in terms of keeping me balanced was my vegetable garden. You see my pet turtle there on the one hand, but with my younger brother. So I was experimenting. My parents had never grown a vegetable garden. So like everything else in this period for me, it was trial and error learning. And in some ways, I write in the book, that's a good thing because I call it expertising. If you've got somebody older than you who knows it all, and they're telling you, well, when I was your age, we caught bass that were 10 times bigger, and here's how we did it. In some ways, it was good to learn through trial and error, because I always remember the things that didn't go as planned. My daughter, she's home from London, and we were talking last night about the book, and I said, it's funny, there was one year in high school, my wrestling record was eight wins and only one loss. Do you think I remember the 8 wins? No, but I remember the one loss like it was yesterday. So it's those things that don't go as planned that you really get those messages to take away and try not to repeat. But I also write in the book that a coach can kill your spirit. And my wrestling coach was a dour guy, and that really rubbed off on me. And I shocked him by quitting my senior year, even though I was a good wrestler, because I wasn't having any fun. He wasn't having fun, and the practices weren't fun, and you'd get to be kind of a nervous wreck before the matches. So I vowed when I got older, I was going to become a coach, and I did. I coached basketball in the town league for many years. And my theory was make it fun for the worst kid on your team, and everybody's going to have an elevated game. And by that simple theory, we always had winning teams and would go to the finals and won the championship one year. And it was that simple approach is let the kids see you, the coach, being loose and having fun, and make that worst player feel like he's crucial to the team. There's a part in the book I want to read for you. Now, I did not take this photo back in the 1960s. I took it later in life, showing I didn't really learn my lesson. But in the book, we've gone up to Moosehead Lake. We've switched places from Vermont to Moosehead Lake. And my brother and I are heading out after we ran to the cabin. And my father goes, "Where are you going?" I said, "Just, exploring a little bit." And I remember his words were always, "Okay, Michael, you're the older one. Take care of your brother." And we go running off, and we find this moose. And I'm reading from the book here. "Geez," I whispered to Bob, "it's huge. It looks prehistoric. Look at the shoulders." The shoulders were a mass of humped muscle, and if we were standing next to the moose, I doubt my head would reach their top. Then I remembered my camera was dangling on a cord around my neck. It was a cheap camera with no zoom lens, and when I looked through the viewfinder, the trees and the brush in front of us blocked much of the view. Any photo would be of poor quality. I had the passing thought that we were close enough, but then the issue of proof entered my head. I needed tangible confirmation that we had seen a moose up close and personal. The wise Mike said to the impulsive Mike, "You don't need proof. You and Bob have had the experience." The dumb Mike shot back, "When are you ever going to get this close to a moose again? Don't be a chicken. Get the picture or no one will believe you." This was the same work logic that had led me to kill the carp in the meadow just so I could get a picture to show others. Let's get closer. And then I'm jumping ahead a little bit. I get the bright idea that the moose's kind of back was turned to us and his head was down in the water, feeding quite often. And I'm going to go back. I get the bright idea, well, if I throw a rock and it splashes right by him, he'll lift his head and I'll get the photo I want. That is not what happened. The rock hit the moose in the rump. Then all hell broke loose. For a big, ungainly creature, this moose sure could move fast. It whipped its head from the water, spray flinging from its snout high into the air. Then it let out a deep snort, wheeled around, and looked directly at us. I held my breath. The bull flattened its ears and lowered its head, similar to this photo I took about 12 years ago. Let's see, I held my breath. Instinct told me it was coming for us. And I hollered to Bob, "Run for your life." And I ran, branches whipping me in the face. I looked over my shoulder. Bob was behind me, and behind Bob was the enraged moose. The beast had already crossed half the bog and was probably about 70 feet behind us, coming on strong. Somewhere in the back of my head, I'm sure I thought, how am I going to explain to my parents if I return without Bob? So you can see why my parents were exasperated by me. Those conversations in my head, the wise Mike talking to the not so wise Mike. And in these two photos that I took more recently, I made the same darn mistake. This time I was in a canoe, dying to get the good photos, which I got. But he let me know that I got too close, and he lowered his head, his ears went back, and he charged down into the water. I'm certain he could have got to my canoe and just tipped the whole thing over, but he pulled up short. So it was my lucky break. So it took me to my 50s to finally learn the lesson of the moose, particularly a bull moose, leave them alone. We're in high school now. These are some of the friends. And in the book, I write about what keeps male friendships together. And I have this theory that for guys, you kind of need to be doing something. It's not like you're going to just get together and have a cup of coffee and sit around for 2 hours. The friends from, and some of these, 3 of these guys in this picture, I'm the one in the glasses, go back to kindergarten, believe it or not, and I still see them today. And I'm convinced the glue that kept us together was the common sport of fishing. So for others, it might be golf. And I don't know if this is, I can't speak for women or not, but I'm certain for men, it's some common activity that draws you together. And so these guys that I grew up with, they still go with me to the cabin today, and we're in our 60s. They're not too happy that I have not put plumbing in the cabin in all these years. So I made it to college. I had turned my academics around in high school, and it was just on my own. I started to realize how hard my father worked with no college education. So I put 2 and 2 together and said, I better turn it up a notch. But one year we packed this group plus a bunch more, a total of 16 of us in one Winnebago, and went to Florida. And I just remember that the sleeping quarters were tight, and there were 2 guys that were short, me and another guy, and our place for sleeping was above where the driver sat in a cupboard. So that's how we made it down to Florida. And although I was doing better academically, my decision-making wasn't the best. I was a designated driver one night, and on Daytona Beach, I parked the Winnebago there. And in the morning, I got up and I wondered, why is the carpet wet? Well, the high tide had come into the Winnebago that we had rented. It was a disaster. And then in college, I was a water nut, always have been, still am. In fact, I was out on a river 4 days ago. It was 27 degrees fishing. But I got this bright idea. I'm going to buy this raft and do whitewater rafting. The raft cost all of $15, if you remember the department store called Bradley's. And There's one part in the book, it's really terrifying. It's probably the worst decision I made in terms of life-threatening, and it was just luck that got me through it. So I'm going to read you that part. This takes place on the Huntington River in northern Vermont in the month of April, when there's still snow on the ground. And the reason I wanted to raft that river was a week later, there was going to be the Winooski River raft race where all the kids from different colleges could enter, and the winner would get, a big prize. So I wanted to test out my my raft. So I recruited this friend named Rob, and I was in the front, he was in the back. I don't know how we both fit in this, it's so small. But our clue should have been, one, there's still snow on the ground. This river was raging. And two, it might be a good idea to actually scout the river before you put in. So by not scouting the river, we went over a small waterfall. It wasn't very big, maybe 3 or 4 feet, but below it was this incredible whirlpool. And I'm picking it up as we go over the waterfall. During the drop, I was ejected into the river, and then the raft, with Rob still in it, plowed into me, driving me under. Every neuron in my body screamed, up, up, up. I flailed, kicked, and twisted, so terrified of not surfacing, I never registered just how cold the water was. But the river held me underwater, as if to say, you fool, you thought this was a game. 2 or 3 seconds after tumbling, I popped up next to the raft and grabbed hold of it. Something similar must have happened to Rob, because he too emerged from the icy water and grabbed hold of the raft. The whirlpool of water below the drop kept Rob and me together along with the raft, but now we had to get out of its clutches. For a second or two, the swirling current spun the raft around and around, trapped downstream of boulders we'd gone over. My chest felt tight and my breath came in little gasps as we twirled. We're not going to get out of this. We're going to die right here, I thought. Then the whirlpool suddenly spit us out and the river pushed us hard into some rocks where the raft briefly got hung up. I tried to climb inside the raft, but my legs were like lead weights dragging behind my body. My next thought was an odd one, but I have to be honest. I remember thinking, I don't want to die alone. I'm glad Rob is here. It was a terrible, selfish frame of mind. I wish I could say I wanted Rob there so he could live and tell my parents what happened to me. But the truth was, I just didn't want to die alone. So my one motto in writing the book was be brutally honest. If you have a selfish feeling like that, put it in. And one reason I remember this particular incident so well, besides the life-threatening nature of it, is I did write up what happened one day later. Whether that was the beginning of me thinking about doing some writing later in life or not, I don't know, but I was always writing up stories, whether they were fiction or real events. And I'm such a pack rat that I found that write-up. And then I tracked down this guy named Rob, who I hadn't seen in, I don't know how many years, 30 some odd years, and ran it by him. And fortunately, he said, your memory on this one is good. And I said, well, that's because I have the write-up. Some of the others, it was tough to piece together. But the colleges should have canceled the whole Winooski River raft race, because I took this picture. I didn't enter it after that terrible experience, but you could see one raft with people on it just got wrapped around the bridge piling. They had to call the National Guard in with helicopters to do rescues. Everything was flooded. There's still snow in the background. They never should have held the race. And this ended up being the last Winooski River raft race ever run, and which is sad because they should have still ran them, but gauged the water level and strength. And I was doing a interview on NPR Radio Boston, and Tiziana Deering was the interviewer. I've interviewed with her before, and and really like what she said. And before we went on the air, she said, I didn't see the part coming about your sister. And I said, well, I dropped a few hints. She goes, well, now in retrospect, I realized you did think something terrible was going to happen. But she said, it hit me like a ton of bricks. And that was the yin and the yang of this book. Some people, publishers said, I don't know if this is going to work because there's so many funny stories and then you get deadly serious. And I answered them back, but isn't that life? And what happened was when I was 20 years old, Lynn was 22, she was in a terrible car accident that left her brain damaged and paralyzed. And I remember coming home from college and it was just awful. And after several weeks in the hospital, my parents said to the doctors, we're taking her home. And the doctor said, no, you're not. There's all these tubes and you need to learn how to work all this stuff. She was in a coma at that time. And my father said, teach us, we're taking her home. She'll get better care here. And this is a part of the story where I talk about the healing power of nature, because it certainly helped me get through it. But it also opened my eyes up to my dad. Here I was kind of thinking, oh, he can't even make my wrestling matches. He ended up taking care of my sister for the next, while he still worked at the bakery during the days, for the next 25 years, and then with Lynn at night. And then during the day, my mother and a visiting nurse would take care of her. And then when he retired, he continued to do that. So for a total of almost 40 years. And for me, the remarkable thing about it was, one, I don't know how he did it physically, the endurance it would take, because every now and then I'd give him a break for a night or two and I'd take care of her. And I was like ready for the funny farm afterwards, because you don't get the proper sleep at all. You're up all night. But the amazing thing with my father was he made the decision to do it and not let it impact other parts of his life. So in other words, he was a really social guy and he couldn't go out anymore, but he just told his friends, come to the house. And I remember them coming to the house, and while he's taking care of Lynn, they would all have a beer. And he never became bitter about it. And I asked him about that later in life. This is when he was still taking care of Lynn in his late 70s. And I'll never forget what he said. He said, it's an honor to take care of her. It's no trouble. This is what I do. And I remember I wrote one little article that mentioned what he was doing. And he said, I prefer if you don't do that. There's a lot of other people doing what I'm doing. I don't want any attention called to me. But in reality, there weren't a lot of other people doing 24/7 for that many years, and those first years when he was working. So that's when my dad and I got close, because I finally grew up and realized, hey, I'm just looking at all the things I wish he had been able to do with me, that I thought he didn't really like me. When he's needed, this man can really step up. And throughout the book, I talk about this childhood dream of, falling in love with Vermont and trying to convince my dad, let's buy a cabin up there, and him saying, I only got 1 week's vacation and we don't have the money. We're not going to buy a cabin. And every year I'd bring it up and every year he'd say no. And I even would draw pictures of kind of the layout. But it was interesting. After I graduated college, I'd saved some money and I started talking about the cabin again. And he shocked me. He said, I'll give you a loan, whatever it is you need to make this cabin dream come true. So this is after working on him for so many years. I think we both knew how fragile life is, and he wanted to help me achieve that dream. So I paid him back over a period of 15 years. The cabin only cost $8,000 back in 1978 on a lake in Vermont. And, I always think visualizing is a strong tool to help you achieve what you want. Because I only looked at one property in Vermont, and it was on Christmas Eve. And the layout was almost like this picture I drew when I was back at like 17 years old. The cabin on the ridge, above the secluded lakes, the mountains in the background, the roadway going up to it, the stream over on the left. I only looked at one place, and the layout was exactly like the picture I drew. So I don't know if you attract it to you or you make it happen, but it does help with goals is to visualize. So the way I had saved up a little money for it is I had taken a job with an insurance company in Chicago. And there's a lot of funny stories then, because now I'm 22 and totally on my own. Day 3 of coming to the office, the whole place burnt down. I'm in the burned out office. I wish I kept the old rotary phone because it melted over my desk into this beautiful pieces of abstract art. I wish I had just peeled it off and kept it. But you know, when you get to that part of the book, some of the misadventures are now getting a little crazier because I certainly hadn't changed. There's a whole story of a jealous boyfriend coming after me in the mountains of Michigan. All my fault, by the way, not the jealous boyfriends. But you know, nothing in my DNA had changed. And I really loved Chicago. I made a bunch of friends. I was learning how to do a backflip. But the one thing I really missed were the mountains and the clear rivers. And you had to get up into Wisconsin to get hills and to even find a river that was clear enough to swim in. So I had made it a decision that if I stay here, I'm never going to leave because I'm making all these friendships. I got to get back to New England. And I did. And what pulled me back was one, of course, my parents and wanting to be near them and helping what little I could with Lynn. But the other one was that attraction to Vermont. And the big appeal of Vermont to me is that there's more dirt roads than there are paved roads. I don't know if that's the case in New Hampshire or Maine, but Vermont is just crisscrossed with dirt roads like this one. And, you know, so you could see some of the photos I was taking over the years, why I fell in love with northern Vermont. You're beyond the tourist line of where many of the New Yorkers have properties way up in the Northeast Kingdom. And again, those clean, clear rivers was a big pull for me. Always has been. It's what I do every summer. If I can't catch a trout, I'll snorkel and look for them. And so this is what the cabin looked like when I bought it on Christmas Eve. The car subsequently went into a ditch, and I had to hitchhike all the way from northern Vermont back to Springfield, Massachusetts on Christmas Eve. But the layout was remarkably similar to that. The ridge is there on the right, and it slopes down to a secluded lake. And so over the years, I fixed it up, but not very much. We put on a deck overlooking the water and the mountains and a screened porch. But outside of that, people always say, you know, why didn't you take it the next level and put in a bathroom and stuff? And I said, you know what? I just want to keep it simple. And it's not for everybody. I've brought some people up there and they don't like it. Other people love it. You can't get internet or cell phone, although I'm afraid it's probably coming this summer as the cell phone coverage expands, and that'll ruin it because people will be looking into their phones instead of looking off to the mountains. And this is the view of the cabin from the little lake. There's two loons there. And we're getting near the end. Let me just check my time because I wanted to read you one last part. Comes at the very end of the book. I realize now that when a person is young and growing up, you're constantly observing, perhaps subconsciously, your parents, or for that matter, any older person you are close to. You see their flaws, their strengths. I was learning, cataloging really, the traits and habits of my father that I admired, slowly incorporating them into my day-to-day life. And isn't that what most people mean when they say another person lives on in their heart? You might catch yourself and think, I just sounded exactly like my dad or mom, or I just reacted the same way they did. If you're lucky and had a good role model, your journey is easier, your decisions sounder, and your courage overcomes fears. My dad demonstrated there are talkers and there are doers, and he showed me attitude is everything. He really meant it when he said taking care of Lynn was a pleasure. And he really did celebrate the smallest of pleasures, like when he walked into my garden, salt shaker in hand, and took a bite of the juicy tomato. And he could transport himself to places simply through the power of his mind. I'm certain he visited the cabin when I'd call him up and tell him about the latest endeavor, folly, or misadventure. I've had this theory that some people manufacture problems to fill a void in their lives, maybe because they have too much time on their hands. That was never an issue with my dad. He once showed me what he did with small problems. He made the gesture of flicking a piece of lint off his shoulder, signifying that it meant so little in the grand scheme of things. He was a master at ignoring discomfort and grabbing fun wherever he could. A friend of my father's once told me, your dad exudes positivity and does it in his own style with his own grace. He certainly had his own style. I would have given anything to see him when, at age 84, he walked into his favorite bar and restaurant on Halloween night, dressed in his Minuteman garb, and whether it was true or not, that the manager told him he best put his musket back in the car. And that's what I remember about him, that he could have let Lynn's accident make him withdrawn and have no time for fun or no time for the three boys. But he really did his best to juggle it and say, no, I choose my response. The tragedy doesn't choose it for me. And looking out at that view, can't wait to get up there. So of course I had to dedicate the book to my dad, and interestingly, he would not have wanted me to write this book, and I struggled with it, and I finally emailed a cousin and I go, how am I going to write about all these stories growing up in the outdoors and what led me at age 22 to buy this cabin without talking about my father and Lynn's accident? And she just wrote back, you can't, you have to. So although he didn't want any attention, he was such a big part of my life, I couldn't do this book honestly without him. And so in my 60s, I haven't changed any. Still doing crazy stuff. If you're interested in the waters between us, or there's a porcupine in my outhouse, you can purchase them on my website. And there's a way when you order the book to have me personalize it. When you place the order, you'll see a little box of who you want me to make the inscription out to and what you might want me to say. And there's a lot of videos of various rescues I've written about, but there's also, we were talking earlier, the pilot who helped me with the Above and Beyond about the Cuban Missile Crisis book, his interview about a narrow escape from a surface-to-air missile and how that was covered up from President Kennedy is on there. And his name was Jerry McElmoyle. He just died 3 days ago, and that book was dedicated to Jerry. He became a brigadier general, was a wonderful man. So it almost seems like that's my mission with so many of these books, is get the stories down while these people are with us, like The Finest Hours. They're all gone now, but in the year 2000, when I was writing it, they were there. So we can open it up, John, to any questions or comments. I'm going to stop sharing the screen. And boy, 1968 had so many tough things. There was, I was just reading about 68 around the world. You had the Prague Spring, where the people tried to push out the Soviet Union. You had Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution, where The educated were killed or sent out to work in the countryside. And as I'm reading all this about 68, I'm going, what's changed? For me, the missing piece that I've never quite understood is why certain men will hang on to power no matter what, even at the, detriment of their own people, killing their own people like you see in Myanmar. I've never been able to understand that. But yeah, I'm seeing, so I can see some of the questions here. John can help me a little bit too.
Sure. I don't see questions in chat. I do see a comment that 1968 was a pivotal year. I think it's okay if people would like to unmute to ask a question. And if you want to raise your hand too, then Mike can recognize you. But if he doesn't see your raised hand, just go ahead and ask.
Yeah, it was a struggle, this book, because again, knowing my father really didn't want attention, and talking about other loved ones is very different than writing about people you've just met and are researching. But it was just one of those things I kind of had to do. I had to tell his story because I just thought, hey, it can benefit other people when they're faced with adversity. Just remind yourself you can choose how you want to respond. And he continued to have this very happy social life and loving people.
Well, I'm curious to know your observations about the anti-war movement, and if that what kind of conversations that led to in your family.
My dad was torn, and he would, although he never went to college, he had this massive bookcase of history books, and he was really torn about Vietnam. I can remember one time him saying, we either got to fight to win it or not at all. And then another time saying, yeah, it's time to get out. And if this thing keeps going on, Michael, you're going to be drafted, And it was tough. I always wondered what happened to a couple older friends that went over there and I lost touch with. Very difficult war to not have the country behind you when you're over there and your life's on the line. We probably have a Vietnam vet in the audience, I'm sure. But yeah, that sure split the country apart. I'm looking. Are there any observations about your past that have changed? Just the maturity and seeing things from a wider perspective. Still getting feedback from different people who are in the book, and some are saying your memory's perfect, others are saying no, that I remember it happening this way. But it's been a fun thing to do. It was one of those things I had to write.
I got one thing.
Yes.
This is John speaking. One of the things that seemed to be missing, which I went through that same time span, graduated from high school in 61 and college 65. Did a lot of traveling. I really enjoyed it. I spent 2 years in Beirut. I was able to stay one step ahead of the draft because I was doing some overseas stuff. But
Right.
There's always been the, what would you say, quiet time that comes on when you're with some friends that were in Vietnam, and how to cover the idea that you were not going to Canada, but trying to stay as far away as
Right.
clean as possible, and that drop in the conversation when there's a gap, and there's
Right.
a gap of whether that and also the other thing I thought was missing to a degree, which is something you could explain, is just the romance and figuring out what women were all about in that same time. It was wild and woolly, and also lots of failed, attempts at getting a healthy relationship. Anyway, that's
Yep.
plenty of stuff right there.
I never did figure it out. Still working on that part of my game. But I was a little younger than you, so yeah, Vietnam was there hanging over, but not to the extent that your age group had it. Yep.
We have a couple questions that might go together about the rest of your family. Questions from Ogie Young and Len Siegel. How was your relationship with your mother, and where are your siblings today?
Yeah, my mom, I do talk about her in the book, and she, opposites attract. Her and my father were as opposite as could be. He was the most outgoing guy. Everybody knew him, from the gas station attendant to everything. My mother was quiet and reserved. And, in the book, I write about how one time she really surprised me, because I used to mistake quiet and reserved for timid. And I remember in my senior year, now by then I had turned things around. I was a good student, that part, but I organized senior skip day, and the whole senior class really did skip and go to the beach. And my fingerprints were all over it, posters and everything. So the principal is going to, I forget what it was, expel me or something for like a week or two. And I certainly didn't want to tell my mother, this is senior, or my father. And I figured, well, I think I better break it to my mother first, because my father's going to explode. And she shocked me. I mistake being quiet for timid. She said, I'll go down there. I go where? She goes, to the high school. I go, what are you going to do? She goes, I'm going to have a talk to that principal. She goes, you have done phenomenal in high school this year. This is not going to ruin your future. And my mouth just fell open, because I'd never seen that in her strength. And then, of course, I saw it with her with Len's accident, because she put the time and work in, as well as my father. Anybody who's a caregiver knows, for somebody that's really totally disabled, it really is a 24/7 job, and it's very difficult to maintain that upbeat personality when physically so much of your time goes into it. And interestingly, my sister passed away shortly after my dad passed away, and I think because she no longer had his love. Everybody that knew the situation would tell me, I'll bet Lynn doesn't last long. And I'm like, really? And that's exactly what happened. Yeah. So it's an interesting book in that there's parts that are laugh out loud, Bill Bryson, A Walk in the Woods, but parts that are deadly serious. But hopefully there'll be some inspiring going on as well.
I think we have one more question.
Did she ever come out of her coma? She did, but not like, back to say full strength. It was very gradual. The first word she uttered was daddy. I couldn't believe that. And we all got our hopes sky high that, in 3 or 4 months, we're going to have conversations with her. But in 3 or 4 months, she kind of plateaued, where she might be able to string maybe one sentence a day together. So it got our hopes sky high that, well, maybe with physical therapy, she was paralyzed on one side of her body. And I used to work with her all the time to see if I could get her to walk on one leg and a brace on the other. We put up railings in the hallway, and I'd have her standing, but after months of this, I realized I'm supporting all her weight. She can move that one foot a little bit, but it became apparent that everything had leveled out. So yes, she did come out of the coma, but didn't regain full functionality of body or brain. But that was the beauty was my father gave her the best life she could possibly have. And not everybody could do that.
Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, John. And thank you, everybody, for coming on this very personal journey with me. It brings back a lot of memories. If you want to hear that powerful radio interview, it's a Radio Boston, NPR. And if you just put in my name and the waters between us, it'll come up. NPR always does such a great job. They actually read the book before they interview you.
And
Well, thank you. I think that's it. Everybody stay safe and hope to see you in person the next time. And John, thank you so much for putting it together. Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
John.
and all
Thank
of
you,
the
Mike.
trustees. It was a team
Thank
effort.
you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Good to see everybody.